The Curse of the Pharaoh. It was an artifact like no other, unearthed from the depths of the Egyptian sands, buried for millennia. Its polished surface still gleamed in the moonlight the night it was discovered. The team of archaeologists had been working tirelessly for months in the Valley of the Kings, searching for remnants of Egypt's ancient past. Little did they know, they would uncover something far more dangerous than relics of history, something that was never meant to be found. The artifact in question was an amulet, a golden scarab, adorned with precious stones that shimmered in the flickering light of their excavation lamps. It had been entombed in a hidden chamber beneath the tomb of an unknown pharaoh. There were no inscriptions that named the ruler, no hieroglyphs to tell their story. Only a sealed sarcophagus and the scarab lying atop it, as though it were guarding something that had been forgotten by time. Dr. Elias Morton, the lead archaeologist, stood over the find, his heart racing. He had spent his entire career chasing legends, and now, here it was, a treasure no one had ever seen before. As he held the scarab in his hands, he felt a strange twinge of unease. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been, and it was cold, unnaturally cold. His assistant, Claire Davidson, stared at the amulet with wide eyes. "Dr. Morton, do you think it's safe to take it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Morton chuckled, shaking his head. "Safe? Claire, this is the find of a lifetime. We're talking about an ancient artifact that could change everything we know about the dynasties of Egypt. We'll be in history books for this." But Claire wasn't convinced. There was something about the amulet that unsettled her. It felt wrong, as though it wasn't meant to be touched, let alone taken from its resting place. Her gaze wandered to the sarcophagus, its lid sealed tightly shut, as if it were never meant to be opened. "I don't know," Claire murmured. "It feels cursed." Morton waved her concerns away. "Cursed? Don't be ridiculous. Those are just stories. This is real. This is history." Reluctantly, Claire nodded, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. The excavation team carefully packed the amulet and began the journey back to Cairo, where the artifact would be prepared for transport to the British Museum. But from the moment they left the Valley of the Kings, things began to go wrong. The first sign of trouble came that very night. Their convoy had made it just a few miles out of the desert when their lead vehicle suddenly lost control and veered off the road, crashing into a sand dune. There were no injuries, but the driver, a local man named Amir, was shaken to his core. "I saw something in the road," he muttered, his hands trembling as he tried to light a cigarette. "A figure, standing in the sand. But when I blinked, it was gone." Dr. Morton dismissed it as fatigue, but Claire wasn't so sure. She hadn't seen the figure, but the atmosphere had changed since they left the dig site. The air felt thick, oppressive, and the sky, clear and cloudless just hours before, was now blanketed in dark, swirling clouds. By the time they arrived in Cairo, the whispers of a curse had spread among the team. Equipment malfunctioned, strange illnesses took hold, and every night, someone would wake up screaming, claiming to have seen shadows moving in their rooms. Always the same shadow, a tall figure, wrapped in ancient burial linens, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The amulet remained locked in a secure case in the museum's archive room, but it seemed to cast a dark pall over everyone who had come into contact with it. Claire, in particular, found herself unable to sleep. The moment she closed her eyes, she would see the scarab gleaming in the darkness and hear a faint whisper in a language she didn't understand. One night, after yet another sleepless evening, she decided to confront Dr. Morton. "Something is wrong, Elias," she said, standing in his office, her voice trembling. "Ever since we found that amulet, strange things have been happening. People are getting sick. They're seeing things. I'm seeing things." Dr. Morton looked up from his desk, his face pale. He, too, hadn't slept in days, but his pride wouldn't allow him to admit that something was wrong. "It's just nerves, Claire. We've all been working too hard. Once the amulet is safely in the museum, everything will be fine." Claire slammed her hand on the desk. "This isn't about nerves. There's something evil attached to that amulet. We have to return it. We have to take it back to the tomb." Dr. Morton stared at her for a long moment before sighing. "You've been reading too many ghost stories. This is real life, not some ancient curse." But the cracks in his calm demeanor were starting to show. Deep down, he was afraid. He hadn't told Claire about the dreams he'd been having, the ones where he was trapped inside a tomb, suffocating under the weight of centuries-old stones, while something unseen whispered his name from the darkness. That very night, the curse claimed its first victim. Amir, the driver who had first seen the figure in the road, was found dead in his hotel room. His body was contorted, his eyes wide open in terror, staring at the ceiling. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but those who saw his body whispered of something more sinister. By then, it was too late to deny the truth. The amulet was cursed, and its presence was wreaking havoc on everyone involved in its discovery. Claire knew they had to act fast. She begged Dr. Morton to return the scarab to the tomb, but he refused. "We can't just give up on the greatest discovery of our lives because of some superstition." But the deaths continued. One by one, members of the excavation team began to fall, each one dying in increasingly bizarre and horrific ways. One man drowned in his own bathtub, though he had no history of seizures. Another was found in his car, having driven it off a cliff with no signs of breaking. As the body count rose, the whispers of the curse grew louder. Desperate and terrified, Claire decided to take matters into her own hands. Late one night, when the museum was closed, she snuck into the archive room, determined to steal the amulet and return it to the tomb herself. But when she opened the case, she found something she hadn't expected. The amulet was glowing. A sickly, greenish light pulsed from its surface, and as she reached for it, a wave of nausea washed over her. Her fingers brushed the surface of the scarab, and instantly, her mind was filled with visions. She saw the tomb, the sarcophagus, and the figure inside, the Pharaoh who had been forgotten by history. His name had been wiped from the records, his existence erased because of the terrible crimes he had committed. He had ruled with an iron fist, sacrificing hundreds to the gods in a vain attempt to secure immortality. And now his curse lived on. The vision shifted, and Claire saw herself, lying in a tomb, wrapped in linen, her face twisted in agony. She was screaming, but no sound came out. With a gasp, she pulled her hand away from the amulet, her heart racing. She knew what she had to do. The curse wouldn't stop until the amulet was returned to its rightful place. The journey back to the Valley of the Kings was a blur. Claire drove through the night, the weight of the amulet pressing on her like a leaden burden. The desert was eerily quiet when she arrived, the wind whispering through the dunes like a warning. She descended into the tomb, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The sarcophagus loomed before her, the lid still sealed tightly shut. Claire placed the amulet back where it had been, her hands shaking. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the ground began to shake. The walls of the tomb trembled, and a deep, guttural growl filled the air. Claire stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the Pharaoh, his body wrapped in decaying linen, his eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "You cannot escape," he hissed, his voice like the wind through the tombs. "You belong to me now." Claire screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing she saw was the Pharaoh's twisted grin as the shadows closed in around her. The next morning, the tomb was sealed once again, and the amulet was never seen again. The death stopped, and the whispers of the curse faded into legend. But those who ventured too close to the tomb at night claimed to hear the faint sound of a woman's scream, echoing through the sands of time. And they knew that the curse